So we're going to talk about some of the variety issues, but also some of the research that I've been doing. So I am handing out here a variety booklet that has all the variety data in it for NDSU's trials that are conducted throughout the state, and I'm going to explain a few things more in detail as we get the slides to work. I also have a production guide for the dry bean. We'll cover dry beans later today. So what I was going to talk about is kind of the concept about that we have an attainable yield that we obtain in our trial plots. And those yields are typically higher than the yields that we obtain in farmer fields. So this difference on the left is kind of the yield potential. And I'm taking here the yield potential that we get in the research plot. And I will later show you a slide that we actually have a high yield potential. So when you think about a variety, it has a yield potential. But then when you put it in the environment, there are all these factors that influence it to reduce that yield potential. So I'm going to talk about a few of those factors that reduce the yields and see if we can come up with some suggestions. But one of the things that we kind of have to think about is also the seasons. And over the seasons, we have had seasons where it's hard to get into the field because of water stress. So I've done some work on looking at the water stress effects on soybean. Now, we always tend to forget the beginning of the season, but we had a challenging beginning of the season in 2022. And some years we have a challenge. And I know around Devil's Lake area, we have also some areas which have salt issues. So I'm just going to only report the highlights. And that is a water management study where I looked at tile drainage. So I'm just only going to highlight the main things. So I've done many experiments over the years. This is a graph of 35 different experiments. The way I organize them is the yield of the control, which is in the black, or sorry, the red line, and the yield that is on the tile. And as you look at it, you can see that in most years, most experiments, the tile does out-yield the non-tile condition. And if you just look at my trials, there was a 5% increase. And this was including all the dry years. We had a couple of dry years included. So if you looked at the previous one, there are peaks sometimes. Tile drainage is very important. So the one thing for you to achieve the best yield is water management. It can be tile, but I'm also talking about just making sure that you have your field drainage in order. It's very important to maximize your yield. So the next thing I want to talk about in general terms is the yield potential and where we are and what we could achieve maybe in the next year. So what I did here is I put on a couple of graphs, and there will be one graph a little bit bigger, but they're all kind of the same. They go from about 1980 to about last year, and each dot on the left, you can see the bushels per acre. So this is the increase in soybean yields in Langdon, Carrington, and then in the soybean breeding program. So I'm just going to give you some of the numbers of how much we have increased over those years. So if you go from 84 to 2021, these were the yields obtained in Langdon, Carrington, and the Central and Southern Research plots. So if you look at what was the yield gain, then in Langdon, which has a very good increase per year, was a 1 bushel increase per year in our research site. So this is the research. 08 in Carrington, and then Central 07, 06. So just get the general around 0.7 of a bushel increase per year obtained in our research site. Now we pamper the research site. The yields in the research site are always higher. I'm talking about the yield gap. I'm just trying to show you that we have a yield gain in those trials, which is partly due to the genetics, partly due to the management, and I would also argue partly due to the longer season. We have, if you look over time, a few more days on the clock, which also translates into more yield. So the average yield in oaks, which is irrigated, so now we take away that the flexibility or the variability, I mean, from the rainfall. Now we're looking at the yields 70 bushel in oats. So that's giving you the potential of genetics. So genetics has a lot more potential than that we achieve in our farmers' fields. So here, again, about an 0.8 bushel per increase. So 0.6, 0.7 increase per year in our research site. Now let's compare that with collectively what farming is doing in North Dakota. The years from 1940 to this year, each dot represents the yield obtained according to the statistical service on average on the farm. Now this is of course always lower than your yield because this is the average. We have here all above average growers, so you have higher yields, right? Okay. But this is the average of the state of North Dakota. So if you look at this formula, then you can come to the conclusion that there is an 0.3 bushel increase on the farm. We have an 0.6, 0.7 in the research plot. So the genetics is increasing probably a little faster than that we realized on the farm. That is where we talk about this yield gap. The genetics is better than what we obtain. So what can we do to increase the productivity on the fields? So one of the things that I've already alluded to that we have here on the table is our variety trials. Now in North Dakota, we have tested about 240 Roundup Ready Extended List beans, 240 entries. That doesn't mean necessarily different genetics. It means that those were numbered by the company. And of course, we have different maturities. So there is variability there, but we have a lot of material there. So in this particular graph, you see that the variety results are not only printed in the booklet, but can also be obtained on the web. You Google NDSU variety trials, select the soybean, go to the right, click there, and you will get the same booklet in a PDF format. So if you want that one. However, we have another tool available, and if you go to vg.ag.ndsu.edu, you will get a tool where you can kind of manipulate a little bit of the data. You go to the site, you get a lot of the various locations where trials have been done. I'm clicking on one here, and there's a trial in Mandem, could select any of them. So here we have the variety, the brand, plant height, oil, seed, test weight, and yield. Now, the interesting thing about this tool is that you can click on any of the top of the graph, for instance, variety, and it will organize it alphabetically, or you go by yield and you go from top to bottom or bottom to top. So you can manipulate this to easily find some of the different varieties. So that's a tool to help you make better decisions. Another tool in that same variety testing tool is to do it in a graphical format. So here I took two varieties and then I looked at different yield and oil percent, just that you can look quickly at varieties. Now, why am I talking about varieties? Because there is so much variability in varieties, not only for yield, but also if you have an issue with iron chlorosis, we have a table there that talks about the differences in the tolerance to iron chlorosis. We don't have any resistance to iron chlorosis, but we have a difference. So the scale that we're using from the top left is number 1, that is green. 1 is good, and 5, you don't want that one in your field, that plants. Now, if we look here, it is a busy slide, but the way it is organized, I have here 240 varieties on the bottom, and each bar is representing a variety. And on the left is the IDC score, again, 1 green, 5 dead. So the taller the bar, the worse they are. So if you look at that whole graph, the average was 3.5. So that would indicate, here's a picture, that your plants would have been pretty yellow if you had an on average. So if you have an issue with iron chlorosis, you ought to select in the left part of the graph where the scores of the IDC are lower, which means more tolerance to IDC. So if you have IDC, this is one of the factors that you really should look at. The other factors that you, of course, look at is the yield, but don't forget also the oil and the protein, because we still are selling an oil and protein crop. So just to kind of highlight the importance of that IDC score, we have difference in the score, but how does that translate into yield? Again, here, the IDC 1 is green, 3 is yellow, and then we have the yield, and this was a trial we did in Grand Forks, and you see there is a pretty strong relationship, negative relationship. The more IDC you have, the lower your yield is going to be. Now I'm going to talk about another aspect, why we can maybe pick up a little bit of yield, and that is looking here at the maturity. So what I did here, I took a trial at NDSU in the southern locations, and I could have done it for any other. This is just for an example. So these are the varieties that were entered into the trial, and on the bottom you see the maturity rating by the company. So if you look here at the dots, and on the left is the maturity date. So for instance, a variety that has all the same maturity rating by the company does not rate the same maturity date. So this one was 22nd of September, and that was the 28th, but the company says it's the same. So you can see there is variability in nearly every maturity, and that is also, if you go to Langdon or any other place, you will have the companies rate a variety, but it is not necessarily all rating and maturing at the same date. So we do in our booklet put also a maturity date, and the maturity date is telling how it was matured at that location, and you can compare varieties and see that there is, a few days difference. So that is one factor about maturity that you have to select. The second thing that I would like to talk about is the maturity and the yield. Now, this is based on a large study that we did. On the bottom, the maturity of a 005 all the way to a 1.5. And on the left, you see the bushels. And you can see that if you planted a later maturity in North Dakota, on average, you get an increase in yield. So if you look at that formula, it says 0.77 times X, which means for each increment of 1/10 of a point of maturity, you probably could pick up about an 0.7 in yield. So I'm not saying go from a 0.5 to a 1.5. No, I'm saying if you can, and it is possible for you to move your maturity one notch up, you will have a yield potential increase. If you go too far on the notches, then you will end up in the fall with a frost damage because you cannot reach the maturity at that point. So there is this fine line where we can move the maturity up, but we also have to be careful. Now, just looking, that was farmer data. I'm just quickly looking at the same data set that I used, 63 varieties. I plotted again the maturity against the yield, and in this particular trial, about the same number. So I'm not saying that it's exactly 0.7. It's kind of in that ballpark that you can expect for an 0.1 increase in maturity. So variety selection, appropriate for your location, very important. Because I'm only giving some highlights, I want to talk about something new that we were doing this year. You probably have heard about a lot of interest from many companies into biologicals. Now, biologicals can be for nitrogen fixation, it can be for the uptake of phosphorus, it can make a better root system, etc. There are a lot of claims on biological seed treatments. So as agronomists, we have been working throughout the US, and all the colored one there, the reddish colored states work together to do one protocol. So we did all the same trials, and I'm going to report on 25 locations in the US. So I'm first giving you kind of the treatment list. Don't worry about all the names. Basically what it says, we used classes that were available in different products. We are not interested in a company product, we are interested in the group. So we have rhizobia, we have bacteria that are from a different kind. So all those products that are available, we had them in this trial. So for instance, we have a free-living bacteria, and you probably have heard some of this also as it is applied to some of the grain crops. So we tried, okay, if that works maybe on grain, and especially in Brazil, there are some reports out that it gives some nitrogen fixation of free-living bacteria. So why not include that as well into the soybean? So here is the data from Fargo. Now, I've cheated a little bit. If you look at the left, it starts with 56 bushels to 62. Everything that is in red was lower than the control. The control is that light green, and there were a couple that were slightly higher. However, not significantly different. There seem to be some differences, but are those real? That is why we do this trial over so many locations. So that was the one that I just showed you, the Braziliensis. Now, looking at 25 environments, which include Minnesota, Wisconsin, South Dakota, and you look at the data here, now the control is on the right. Nothing really was better than the control. The variability was there. We had only 1 or 2 locations where there was some significant difference between treatment, but overall, over the 25 environments was no different. I'm not saying that the biologicals don't work, but if you just apply them without any prior knowledge that you need them, probably your yields are just going to be the same as your control. So we will repeat this experiment again next year, and we'll see what the results will be. But based on this, it looks like if you just randomly apply a product, you will just get a random response. Probably is not going to be significantly different from the control. If you are missing something, for instance, if you've never grown soybeans, you really have to apply the right rhizobia bacteria in order to get your nodulation going. So there are specific cases where we definitely need a certain bacteria, but these are other types of products. So the last or kind of related to it point that I want to bring out is we also did some digging up of the nodule of the roots and counted the nodules. So what we did here is on the bottom, we looked at the size of the nodules and the volume. And here we can see that the more the volume is, on the left is the yield. You can see that more volume of nodules also increased our yield. So there is a relationship. So kind of bringing this home, this one is control, is the bar in the blue. And then if you plant into where there is excess nitrogen, what is happening? We get fewer large nodules, fewer medium nodules, and fewer small nodules. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because this is this inverse relationship between increasing of nitrogen gives you decreasing of nodules and less fixation of nitrogen. And the reason why I'm talking about it is that occasionally somebody may have fertilized for wheat or corn and has to make a decision at the end of the season and go to soybean. So what it does is it will give you less nodulation. The good news is that you will get the same yield because the plant will use the nitrogen that is there, but it will not really benefit from it. So volume is important. With N applied, you will have a fewer volume and less nodulation. So because of the time, this is about some of the highlights that I have today. I will be around so we can talk about some other topics during the lunch. We transition now to Greg, who is talking about a few other practical things about how to maximize your yield and hopefully reduce the yield.
We might have a minute or two before slides are up and ready. Any questions for Hans? Take 1 or 2. You will be around at least early afternoon. Your probably session, I think, is at 1:30. So yeah, between now and then to ask Hans questions about soybean. All right, my slide's up, so I'll begin. I organized my slide set and thinking I may change it up just a little bit. So I'm going to do that. So bear with me. All right, so we don't have much time this morning. There's 3 speakers. We each have no more than 20 minutes. So what do we tell you that's useful in 15 minutes? Hans just said we got to give you practical information, so we'll try our best to do that. So if you've heard me speak before on soybean, you've probably seen a chart similar to this. I just really like to start with this as we talk about plant establishment because we cover a lot of different areas. So I just revised this last month, December 2022. So it is a little bit new for those of you that may have seen this in the past. But what it is 10 factors that NDSU has researched, field trials, work across the state. And so what we're after here is establishment factors. And we'd like to have you move from option B to option A because of the reasons for increase in yield. And the yield information is based on the trials that are listed here. In most cases, we have double-digit trials that support the information. There's a few here with single digit, but we think we have a pretty good story. And I also want to mention that this is a starting point for you and not an ending point. So as farmers, you know your fields, and maybe planting 150,000 pure seeds per acre does not fit that field. So just consider this as a starting point, and then you adjust as you see best on your farm or as a consultant as you work with your farmers and their fields. So I do have some of these factors in green. I'm going to talk about those a bit in my discussion. And you also notice that with seed inoculation, soybean history, and pea fertilizer application, I have these shaded. And the reason I do that is because it's not a definite yes. If you go here, you're going to get yield increase. You see the numbers, pretty low. And in the case of seed inoculation of soybean history, if Dave Franson was up here, extension specialist talking, he would discourage you from seed inoculation. You'll see the average of 16 trials. We see a 2% yield increase. Is that enough to make it worthwhile? Price-wise, probably. It's not that big a cost factor. It's more inconvenience, I bet, for most people. Oh, I'm going to deal with soybean inoculants. But so take it for what it's worth. And then on our fertilizer application, we've always recommended broadcast application based on other work from Minnesota, Nebraska, maybe other states. But in our work here, we've had a tough time seeing a yield response with broadcast over a banded application away from the seed. All right, so that's all I'm going to mention about this. And yeah, we'll give you some factors to think about. Now I'm going to go back. So here's what I'm prepared to talk about today. One is that we've done lots of work with row spacing and plant populations, and I'm going to share that information with you. Got a couple tidbits in plant nutrition as shown. For example, what would happen? Would that be beneficial for us to apply phosphorus the year preceding the soybean crop? It's done for the east, and maybe it should be done in North Dakota. And then another one is I want to talk a little bit about rhizobium seed inoculants, just maybe a follow-up from Hans's discussion. And then I want to talk a little bit about our cover crop work. Anybody see soil blowing last year? Maybe not in the Northeast. Boy, I sure saw it in central North Dakota. And reduced tillage and cover crops, that can go a long way in helping reduce soil erosion and as well as some other benefits from cover crops. So that's what I'm prepared to talk about. But maybe you're not interested in that. So I'm going to pause, and maybe it'll take the rest of the period. We'll just try to answer your questions. So, what's on your mind on soybean production? Remember, Sam will be talking about disease management. So yeah, we'll wait on that one. Okay, there's a question over here.
I'll wait for to talk about disease. I'll wait.
Okay, good, ready, Sam.
What am I getting prepared for?
So anything on production? Otherwise, you'll force me to keep talking, guys. I'd rather hear you. Yes, sir.
I've had some tissue samples show a zinc deficiency in soybeans.
Okay, our recommendation would be not to worry about it on soybean. On dry beans, yes, corn, flax, potatoes, but not soybean. So unless you don't have enough stress in your life, I wouldn't worry about it. And I bet you do. So soybean plant nutrition is actually fairly straightforward. And I tell audiences, and maybe I should, but I tell audiences that people are trying to make it complicated. they're probably selling something to you that maybe you don't need. Okay, other questions? All right, well, we'll jump into some of the information that I had prepared. So I think it's really important to share with you our work with soybean row spacing and plant populations. And so, anybody remember Dwayne Bergman? He was an extension agronomist. I know Eric does and Brian does, and there's some of you others that remember him. But when Dwayne was our agronomist, our broadleaf crop agronomist, recommendation then and still really until very recently, we said that if you can establish an early season stand of 150,000 plants, irregardless of row spacing, you're in good shape to have optimizing yield. We've done work supported by the Soybean Council and others for, I say 2 decades, but it's 25 years we've done this. And a lot of data just sat. And so Hans and I, during COVID, we thought we should really take a look at this because there should be opportunities to fine tune our recommendations with these 2 factors. It just seems like most private companies have their recommendations and we should maybe get a little more detailed as well. So that was our objective. And so what we did in 2020 is we looked at 37 trials that were conducted across the state. Some trials from Eric, from Brian, in the valley, across the state, more though in the east versus the west. And so, as I mentioned, we just wanted to see if there's opportunity to fine tune our recommendations on plant establishment. And so I did that. We published this guide. If you want to take a look at all the details, I'll show you some summary stuff. But if you look at want to see the details about where we went to gather the data, look this up on the web search. Just type in NDSU soybean rows and populations, and it should come up quite readily. So I'm going to give you a very short version. And so when we summarize the data, we actually split it out by regions, very simply east and west. And in both cases, both regions, narrow rows won quite readily. So I'm going to emphasize the east because I assume all of you are east, but you got to define if you're east or west. And because in our west data is primarily from Rugby westward, Rugby, Minot area, and Williston, Henniger, and then east is essentially 281 eastward. Includes landed data in Carrington, Oaks, and a lot of the valley. So what we found, as you can see, is that narrow rows won, and planting rates of 170,000 puralized seeds per acre provided the optimum yield. In the west, so maybe jokingly, maybe you're from Church's Ferry, you feel I'm Westerner. Well, that's fine. Then maybe you want to take a look at this. But the eastern part actually relates to higher yield potential too as well. But in the west, narrow rows won again, but the planting rates were less in order to optimize yield. Okay, and this might surprise you a little bit, but we'll get into this a little bit further. And keep in mind, this is planting rates, puralized seed basis, and we're not looking at economics. That's your homework. You're going to look at cost of seed, the market prices, and see where it fits, and then the performance on your individual fields. All right. So to take a little bit step further, though, we were talking about puralized seed planting rates. Now this shows actual stands based on this summary information. So soybean plant stands after deductions of field lots, even when you plant a puralized seed basis. Not all those seeds develop into viable plants, do they? So we're going to use the 10% as the loss besides the puralized seed. And so in the east, we said narrow rows, 170,000 plants. And then if we assume 10%, which is probably quite close for most people, but you can go lower if you want, or you can go higher. But what's interesting is it's a little over 150,000. So that's pretty neat. Hans was pretty quick to point that out after we got through all that data. And that was really a chore. But we got through it, and so our old recommendations really are not that far off at all. And then for the west, we said a lower planting rate, 150,000, and that translates with 10% yield loss of about 135,000. All right, so that's our guidelines. So it's up to you I'm sure you must check your fields after the crop is up, do those plant counts, and then, just like I mentioned earlier in that table, this is the starting point for you to consider. And check your fields and then adjust based on all the things you need to consider to have the optimum planting rate and actual stand. All right, let's go to plant nutrition. Yeah, time is slipping away. Soybean soil fertility, we put this publication together a few years ago. It actually needs revisions already, but that's okay. And in there, we talked briefly about what they do in the central part of the Midwest or north central region, I should say, where oftentimes when it's a corn soybean rotation, they'll apply all their phosphorus, both the corn and the soybean. Is that viable in North Dakota? We've not done any work on it, and so we explored that. And this is another project that's supported by the Soybean Council, by the way. The thing is that versus other states, in North Dakota, with lots of research, we have not found soybeans that respond to phosphorus once our soil test, the Olsen soil test, gets to medium or above. So that's a good thing, well, certainly. So, so this may not apply directly, but I just want to tell you a little bit about our work, what we found so far, and then you can think about it. So we started the work at Carrington in 2021. That was the first year we generated data. And then Minot joined us this past year to add to the database. Okay, so the real question is it a North Dakota strategy to apply phosphorus for both crops the year before the soybean are growing? So we try to find low testing soils for phosphorus. Why do upper medium or above? Because we don't recommend phosphorus application. We don't think that you realize a yield response from that. So that was a soil analysis, in particular at Carrington, where we were low or very low, and then the phosphorus applied based on our recs for each crop. And you probably can realize what the benefits would be with the strategy. So to tell you a little bit about what we did, there are only 3 treatments. They're listed here. This is the first year of corn on low testing ground. And so untreated check. In treatment 2, we applied phosphorus for the corn, but only for the corn. And then treatment 3 for both crops. That's what we did the first year. And then the second year, we applied soybean over the footprint. The only fertilizer application we had to do was apply the phosphorus for the soybean in treatment 2. That's why I highlighted it. So what have we found so far? I'm not including Minot data because the soil analysis was medium, low medium though. At Carrington, 2-year average, low testing soil, and here's the check, and then the 2 treatments with the phosphorus application. Notice no difference in yield. There's a trend here for a yield increase, but between the 2 treatments that we're interested in, there's certainly no difference. And so if we look at this preliminary information, they say the strategy of applying phosphorus ahead of the soybean might be viable. We're going to do this again at Carrington in the upcoming season. Hopefully we'll have statistical difference between these. We'll let you know. But there is anyway some credence to applying phosphorus the year before soybean. All right, Hans talked a little bit about his work with biological seed treatments. This is one trial that we did at Carrington. I just want to talk about it briefly. Sorry.
Any difference on the corn yield?
The question was difference on the corn yield, and the first year we did at Carrington, we did not take corn yield. I overlooked that because I was focused on the soybean. But we did in 21. Statistically, I don't know if there was a difference. I think there was. Of course, 21 was a drought year. We only had 80 bushel yield on the corn. And then last year we did take yield again on the corn. And yes, there was a yield increase, of course, with the phosphorus application. But between the 2 P treatments, no, it wasn't. All right, so in this trial, we used premium products from 4 companies. These are all liquid inoculants. And there's several of these that have are labeled as secondary biological products or a component of the